Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder. Joining me as usual is the Political State crew from the Capitol, Dale Denwalt, from the Federal Desk, Justin Wingeter. And this week our guest is Representative Emily Virgin from Norman. Representative, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I think it's like your third or fourth time on the episode. You may be one of our more frequent guests since we started doing this a couple years ago.
Just love it.
So welcome back to the studio. Well, we've been talking a lot lately about the elections. The primary elections are coming up June 26th, so a little less than 20 days away. Mainly our focus has been on the gubernatorial race and primarily on the Republican side where it seems to be most of the drama. But today we wanted to talk about some of the other races that haven't necessarily been getting attention both at the state and the federal level, or federal and state level. I asked everyone here today to come with one or two races that they're kind of most interested in for a variety of reasons, and we can kind of talk through that. And Representative, let's start with you. As you look at the June 26th primary election, what are some races that you feel like are kind of the most interesting to you that you're going to be watching closely on election night?
Yeah, well, there are a ton of races out there, and for people watching politics, it's going to be a really interesting night. But I wanted to talk about a couple races, notably because both of them have primaries, and all of the candidates are females, and we're seeing a lot more women run this year.
Yeah.
And so in Norman, the Senate race to replace Senator John Sparks, who termed out after 12 years. Representative Claudia Griffith is running for that, and then a former councilwoman, Alicia Cardula, and then a teacher and attorney, Mary Brown Boren, are all running in that race, and it seems to be a pretty close race right now. Just driving around Norman, it's in my district, and so it seems like everybody's working hard. I've gotten mail pieces from the first two that I talked about, so I think it's going to be a close race. I don't know if there's going to be a runoff or not, but it's definitely one to watch because you've got somebody who's already elected in the legislature and then also a council member, and then Mary's got the teacher angle and has been involved in education politics for a very long time. And then another one that I think is going to be interesting to watch is Senate District 40, and that is a Democratic primary, and the winner will face Senator Irvin Yen, and that's a seat that a lot of people watching politics think that could go to a Democrat this time.
Kind of northwest Oklahoma City, where we've seen some changes.
Right. So as part of Representative Cindy Munson's district, which flipped from Republican to Democrat fairly recently, and just looking at the numbers and the presidential election, it looks like one that Democrats could win. So there you've got Carrie Hicks, who is a teacher, has 3 kids, one of them with type 1 diabetes, and so she's talking a lot about education issues and about being a mom and challenges in healthcare and type 1 diabetes. The cost of insulin is something that she's been talking about a lot. And then you've got Danielle Ezell, who was formerly the head of the Oklahoma Women's Coalition and has been involved in politics and nonprofit organizations focusing on women's issues for a really long time. So they're both fantastic candidates, and I know that some people are a little sad that they're running against each other because they're both really great, and they wish that they could be spread around, but they're both in the same district. So I think either way, whoever wins that race, and I think it'll be a close one also, whoever wins that is going to be a great candidate in November.
Well, I want to talk about those specific races, but let's just you talk about in general the increase in female candidates this year, and that's something we've seen across the country, including here in Oklahoma and some other races, including at the federal level. But some of these are not necessarily new names. I mean, you have some current elected officials, people who've been running for office. So it's not like this whole list is just candidates that just decided one day to run. But why do you think we've seen that here in Oklahoma? I mean, do you think this is tapping into the national mood that we've seen, or is there something happening in Oklahoma too that's kind of caused this?
Yeah, I think both of those things are true. I think that, especially in Norman, we've seen a huge increase in female candidates at the local level. So we now have a majority female city council in Norman, which is something that we've never had before, and I don't know if that's ever happened in Oklahoma before. And so we had a lot of female candidates running at that level, and now you see them stepping up to the state level. So you've got that going on, but you've also got the education movement movement, the teacher walkout played into a lot of this. You know, education is a field dominated by females, and so you've got a lot of teachers who are women who are thinking about running or getting involved. You know, in Senate District 40, Danielle is somebody who's been involved for a long time. Carrie is somebody who's been involved for a long time. Her husband worked for Governor Brad Henry when he was in the governor's office, and so both of those names have been around for a while. But I think that as the nation moves towards more female representation, Oklahoma is also. Unfortunately, we're still at the bottom in terms of female representation in the legislature, but it seems like that has become something that people are talking about, and that women are saying we need to fix that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about these specific races that you mentioned, and I want to kind of talk about through the guy. I mean, obviously, there's Democratic primaries that you brought up, and I'm curious, what does it look like to run in one of these districts versus the other? And you know, something that we've talked about on the show before is this idea that it seems like the Democratic Party, the Democratic caucus in Oklahoma is becoming more and more progressive. You know, a lot of times people say, hey, you know, Democrats in Oklahoma, they've got to be a little bit more close to center, they've got to be more conservative than you see in some other states, and maybe that's true if you're running, you know, for governor. But it seems like the play right now in the House and the Senate is we're not talking about a balance of power being up for grabs. I mean, Democrats aren't taking the House or the Senate anytime soon. Yeah, so I don't know if you've heard that, Representative. But so it seems like maybe there's a freedom a little bit there, right? To really, you know, as Democrats have done well in the urban areas. So how is that going to look? I mean, you're talking about Oklahoma City and Norman. You know, what's the strategy for Democrats? What's the message for them as they're trying to make inroads in those two districts?
Yeah, so the message in the two districts is largely the same because education is the main issue in both districts. It's always been that way in Senate District 16. Senate District 16 in Norman has traditionally been a Democratic seat. Former Pro Tem Cal Hobson, that was his seat. And then John Sparks replaced him, a Democrat for 12 years. And so that's one that has traditionally been a Democratic seat. And so the message there is a little bit more progressive than you have in Senate District 40, which has traditionally been a Republican seat, but an urban Republican seat, which is where we're seeing a lot of the flips from Republican to Democrat right now. So I think the messages are largely the same there, and you're seeing across the state. It's happening in Tulsa too. A lesser extent in Tulsa than in Oklahoma City, but that Democrats are having more success in the urban areas now. You know, last cycle we lost some rural seats where we had members terming out, but we picked up seats in the urban areas in Oklahoma City. Colin Walkie, for example, Cindy Munson, and Mickey Dollins, they all flipped Republican seats. And so that's something that you saw nationwide happening. It has happened a little slower in Oklahoma, but you're seeing that Democrats are having better luck in the urban areas than in the rural areas. And that's not necessarily surprising. You're seeing the urban areas get younger and the rural areas get older. And so, but in both districts, you know, I think the message is about the same. Again, focusing on education, focusing on revenue, that's a huge conversation that's taking place right now. And of course, you know, how would a candidate have voted on the teacher pay package and an increase in gross production tax? And you're hearing a lot of Republicans say, yes, I would have voted for that, and I would have supported that, and I support increasing the gross production tax and things like that. So the message has shifted incredibly from just 2 years ago. Yeah,
those are definitely going to be really fascinating races to watch for the Democrats. I want to talk about some other races that are in the urban area, but I think we're going to zigzag a little bit here. Dale, I'm curious, what race are you kind of keeping an eye on?
Right, I found a couple. The first is the race. Kevin McDougal, as you know, state representative. He made several people mad at toward the end of last session. About the time people started filing for office, he posted a video criticizing teachers for continuing the walkout, and he said the kind of behavior that they were displaying at the Capitol. He voted for the tax increase and supported them, and he said, but I'm not going to vote for another stinking bill or something like that. And it rubbed people a long way, a lot of people the wrong way. One of the people who filed, actually a Democrat, as a teacher, who was at the the teacher walk out of the Capitol and just, I guess, decided at the spur of the moment to file. But he also does have a Republican challenger, and it'll be interesting to see if he, like many other Republicans, are really trying to fight for their seat as they face a challenge from the right. The other race that I'm interested in is the Labor Commissioner race, especially the Republican side between Leslie Osborne, State Representative, Kathy Costello, the wife of the late Labor Commissioner Mark Costello, and Keith Swinton. As far as I can tell, it's really a battle between Costello and Osborne. Osborne really made waves in the last couple of years with her leadership in the Appropriations and Budget Committee, and trying to, I guess, sort of right the ship and talk about fiscal responsibility, but also we've got to pay the bills. And she was a major Republican proponent for revenue before a lot of others were. Kathy Costello is bringing her experience since her husband's death, being sort of a player on the state and national stage for mental health reforms, and she's focusing on, especially in the workplace, what she could do as labor commissioner to improve that. So really the entire field, you could look at races from all across the state and pick one that I think is interesting or one to watch. But these two are mine.
Yeah, definitely. The Labor Commission one, so last night, NonDoc hosted a forum or debate between the Republican candidates at the Tower Theater. My biggest takeaway was just how passionate Costello and Osborne's supporters were. There was a pretty cordial debate happening on stage, and then a pretty raucous debate between their crowd, which you don't normally. Labor commissioner is not necessarily the most sexy race in the state, but there seems to be a lot of passion behind that. There was also an open bar, maybe that helped, or a cash bar, maybe that had something to do with it. But yeah, these are kind of. As you talk about between Costello and Osborne, two kind of more prominent politicians, quickly prominent. Osborne kind of made a name for herself as maybe being a more moderate Republican, even at odds with the Speaker. Last year, and many times I've heard her speak, she kind of tries to play herself off as, I'm a Republican, but I, state over party is kind of her message. And you're right, with Costello, really kind of championing mental health. And what that looks like in the workforce, and mental health has become a more dominant issue. Going back to Kevin McDougal, what district is that he's in? It's
12.
12, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I think, if you're lucky, during your time as a House member, you maybe only get one statewide story to your name. I say lucky, probably you don't want any. But for a lot of people, that's probably what they know about him, right?
It's a national story too. CNN picked it up, and it was one of the more. I think everybody was kind of waiting for that moment when someone would lose their cool and post something online. He posted a video from the House floor. He was visibly, angry about something, and he I think his mouth got the better of him, quite frankly. And he later apologized, and he deleted the video. He's like, just don't take it the wrong way. He said, I still support teachers, and I'm still going to support teachers. But I think a lot of people were really upset that he criticized the way that, quote, teachers were acting when the teachers were saying that they were there for education funding.
Yeah, kind of a bold move to stream a live video from the House floor, right?
During the walkout.
During that. That's just an interesting tactic.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm sure there's some that maybe are going to support him for it, right?
Yeah.
There's some that probably see that. He wouldn't have said it if he didn't feel like it was, at least tapping into somewhat of what his constituency thinks.
Right, and there are a lot of people I've seen who say similar things. Who are like, I can't believe these teachers, and they got their pay raise. Why didn't they just go back to the classroom? And there are people who are there to remind them. The continued walkout wasn't necessarily about a more of a pay raise, but more about more education funding. And so he certainly tapped into probably the minds of a lot of his constituency. I don't know whether it's going to be enough to keep him in office.
Yeah, but definitely give some passion to your opponents too on the other side as well.
And it's certainly going to be on some some push cards.
Yeah, you imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just it's low-hanging fruit right there if you're running against him. Justin, I know you've got a federal race, but mine were at the state level, so I'm gonna jump ahead real quick and stay in the state, and then we'll go to your federal ones.
Sure. And I'm watching Senate District 40
oh,
as
well, yeah,
well.
please, yeah, you've got tell me about your.
I live there, and I think is that your district as well? I know we're pretty close.
No, it's
a little
not.
off. Okay,
a little off, yeah, a block away.
Quite a bit of door-to-door activity there, mailers. That's an interesting one, and that's going to be close. As a registered independent, I don't vote in primaries, but that one is going to be interesting.
Yeah. Well, you
could
vote in primaries now.
I don't vote in primaries.
But so that's interesting. Have you had both candidates knock your door?
I believe I have. Yes,
yeah.
I've not been home when they did, but I believe they have.
Yeah. It looks like both of them are out pretty much every day.
It seems like it. Yeah. Is there any concern in a Republican district like that the Democrats are kind of? Would you rather just have one Democrat and then they don't have to focus on a primary? You don't have to spend money on a primary?
Yeah, so that there are a couple of schools of thought on that.
Right.
One is that, I'll say selfishly as a candidate, you don't want a primary. It's more work, more money. Especially in a competitive primary, I had a very competitive primary in 2010, you essentially deplete all your resources and then have to start completely over. But in looking at it from a political observer, consultant side, you don't necessarily hate the fact that your candidate is getting out there and getting some name recognition. I think it's always good to be on the ballot before the general election. That's one of the reasons why the Democrats wanted to open up primaries to independents, was because giving independents an opportunity to vote for a Democrat and see their name before the general election it seems like a smart move to get the name recognition. So it's like I said, as a candidate you don't really want it to happen, but I think it's actually good for the party, for candidates themselves and their campaigns to have a primary.
Yeah, well, and they both have been running for quite a while.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think when if you're also thinking about it, if you are the more established candidate or the candidate who's been running the longest, and then someone just pops up and it's kind of a pest, but you have to deal with. But both of these candidates have been running for a while, so whoever kind of emerges from here is going to have been on the on the streets for almost a year, if not more than a year.
Yeah.
It's an interesting race because, as we talked about, it's that northwest Oklahoma City quadrant. You talked about Representative Munson, who was able to flip that seat, Waukee. Those are both House races, so we haven't seen the Senate yet on the northwest side. But that seems to be kind of maybe a transitioning district. One that I'm taking a look at is Senate District 30, which is vacant right now. Mayor David Holt, newly elected mayor of Oklahoma City, vacated that seat. It's interesting for a couple of reasons. I'm watching the Republican primary. There is a Democratic primary. Julia Kurt and then Larry Dean Buss, who hasn't raised any money. So Julia's, I think,
she's been running for a long time,
and Julia really reminds me a little bit of the Munson playbook in a way, where this is not a wave the liberal banner everywhere you go. This is kind of more of a common sense, moderate, not running away from the D next to your name. She comes from the nonprofit world, and she has been campaigning for nearly a year, if not more. In the Republican field, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 candidates, or 7 candidates running in the Republican field. So it'll be interesting to see, you don't want 6 challengers, right? You don't want to.
No, kind of a nightmare. Yeah.
So definitely, it seems like there could be a runoff there.
Yeah.
And for the most part, you have Lori Callahan, who's a mother and a substitute teacher. Eric Harris, who is black and an attorney. The rest is white men who are attorneys. So it'll be interesting to see kind of who emerges from that Republican primary, which I'm going to be watching, and then goes up against Julia Kurt, who it's a Republican seat, but it's Holt was always kind of a moderate, in the Senate. So and now we don't have a lot of great data to go on because he won the general election uncontested the last 2 times.
But it's one of those that, looking at recent presidential elections, just looking at all the recent statewide elections, the numbers just show you that that's one that's in play for Democrats. So, you know, Julia was somebody that I think was recruited to run because she comes from a different background than you see in a lot of political candidates. She came from the arts community, that nonprofit world, and so it's been really interesting to watch her transition. She's working really hard, and she's been able to tap into sort of a completely new donor base. People who don't usually give politically, but they give to nonprofits, they love Julia and what she's done, and so they've been giving to her.
Yeah. Well, this district is like shaped like a C. So it's a little bit challenging. You got to be really targeted about where you're going. It's, you know, you look at parts of it and you say, I see what they did there. I mean, so it makes sense in some ways. But it picks up some of those kind of more transitioning Northwest Oklahoma City neighborhoods. It also picks up the Quail Creek area a little bit. Lake Hefner, so if you live on a houseboat, this is the one that you're going to be voting in. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. And I'm really curious if Holt weighs in at all in this race. I doubt that he does. I doubt that he does.
Yeah,
but I definitely plan to ask him. So once there's two candidates, just because I mean, he's been real friendly to Julia. You know, she's kind of really wisely, I don't know a better way to put this. She's not used his name, but she's praised him for some of his. I don't know. She's kind of done a really good job of to put herself in a position where the average person who says I like Holt, well, I guess I like her too, kind of, even though she may be from a different party. So anyways, that's one I'm watching, and then a little bit further north is House District 82. Kevin Calvey's seat, who's not running because of term limits. There's 12 Republicans in that. And what's really interesting, Chris Castile wrote a story this week. You know, some of them are running against the teacher tax or the tax hikes to fund the teacher pay raise. Others are running in favor of it. Calvey voted against it, one of the few Republicans to vote against it. I mean, whoever, it's probably going to be a runoff, but it'll be interesting to see, are voters going to go with the anti-tax candidate, or are they saying, are Republican voters going to say, no, we still back this?
Assuming they're all equally funded, or they're on either side, they're equally funded candidates, and candidates who work hard enough. This could be a bellwether for the rest of the state. I don't know how closely that District 82 aligns with the rest of Oklahoma. It's fairly conservative, as they elected Kevin Calvey for 12 years. But if it could come down to what kind of Republican or what do Republicans think about the tax increase and moving forward based on what these candidates say.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I would believe that I think a majority of Oklahomans were in favor of the tax increase. I mean, the majority of members voted for it, probably felt like their constituents were behind it. I do think that there's a larger group that's against it than maybe people thought or assume. I mean, we've talked about before, most of the gubernatorial candidates on the Republican side are running against it. I mean, it's a.
But you've seen a couple of them sort of flip-flop on it. And so what that tells me is that the polling really isn't clear on Republican primary voters, at least. I haven't seen any Democrats who say that they don't support it. But at least for Republican primary voters, the gubernatorial candidates seem to be having a little bit of trouble gauging whether people in their primary support it or don't, because you've got somebody like Stitt who says he doesn't support it, or he wouldn't have signed it, but he's not going to vote to repeal it. And so I think you see a lot of that kind of playing both sides. So it'll be interesting, and that having the veto referendum going on right now is a huge factor in these races, because you can't just say, well, what's done is done, we're going to move on from that. You have to essentially take a position on it because it may be on the ballot.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. You talk about what may be on the ballot, and what they're eyeing that for November, right? So, I mean, we've talked sometimes about what the medical marijuana state question on the same day as the primaries may mean. Is that going to drive out some more conservative voters? I wonder if the repeal in November could drive out more public ed supporters, because there has been a pretty passionate campaign against it too, right?
Absolutely.
To where, I don't know, I mean, those things have an impact down ballot.
Well, there's a small chance that if they get the signatures that the governor could put it on the primary runoff ballot.
True.
And I know that is not something that the people who are hoping to keep the taxes are wanting. I know they want it to be on the general election ballot, because when you look at a primary primary runoff, most of those are going to be Republican races. And so that turnout would be a little skewed as opposed to a general election.
Yeah, yeah, it would be interesting to see. So that's a state. We also have some federal races going on. For the most part, maybe, I mean, there are some interesting primaries. We've talked about how come November there may not be a lot of drama, but one race we've talked a lot about, Justin, is CD5, the congressional district here in Oklahoma City. So you're watching, obviously, what the Democratic primary on that one with some interest.
Yeah. Russell shouldn't have any problem in his primary. He does have two candidates, or two opponents rather, but he should cruise and shouldn't need a runoff. The Democrats almost certainly will. I mean, 6 candidates. You know, we've talked about this race quite a bit, but it's an interesting one to watch. I mean, the 2 candidates who got in first, Kendra Horn and Tom Guild, would probably make the runoff, I think, if the election is today. But we have no polling, so we're not really sure. So it will be an interesting one to watch. But
yeah,
I mean, I would think those 2 leading the fundraising, leading just how long they've been running, would seem to be the primary, you know, runoff candidates. But even then, there's a lot to watch. I mean, who among, just between the 2 of them, who gets more votes? What is the Democratic turnout and this sort of thing? This will be something to watch in a lot of districts. I mean, if Democrats are going to flip a district like this, CD5, they're going to need their numbers to come out way more than they typically have, or at least some increase there. And if we'll see if that momentum, you know, comes out on June 26th.
Yeah, and you've talked about before. I mean, you've talked to other like national observers who've looked at CD5 and said, you know, this is a Democratic district. It's just, I mean, in terms of the makeup and the demographics and stuff like that, it just hasn't been. I mean, you know, we got to figure out who the Democratic candidate is going to be first. But do you, I mean, from what do most observers believe? Who needs to emerge for to have the best chance? Do you feel like to flip this seat? I mean, are there people that, you know, from the outside that aren't attached to one of these candidates who are picking one or the other?
I would say, I mean, it really depends on what philosophy of thought you have. I think the traditional thought in Oklahoma is that a moderate Democrat does better in a Republican district. If that's true, then it's Kendra Horn. You know, I mean, liberals like Tom Guild argue that they're the ones that really turn out Democrats, and they're the ones that really excite people, and so that they're better off running against Russell, and that they provide a starker dichotomy there between themselves and Russell. So it would depend who you ask. I mean, my argument would probably be that Kendra Horn fares a little better head-to-head against Russell for a number of reasons, but you know, it would really depend who you ask.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's not your district, but your thoughts on the CD5
Yeah,
one?
so I think that Kendra could potentially get out without a runoff. She has been, I think, clearly working the hardest and just really blowing everyone else out of the water in terms of fundraising. She's even outraised Steve Russell in a couple of the reports. And so I think she's the clear front runner, but with so many other candidates, it could be a runoff. But I think she'll win, and I think she definitely has a better chance against Steve Russell, just because of her experience in politics, but also because she, you know, she does seem to be running, I would say, a more professional campaign, whereas, you know, Tom Guild is more of a grassroots progressive who is really not catering or tailoring his message to the district necessarily. And so I think Kendra is going to win it. That's, you know, like you've said, that's the one that outside observers think would flip first in Oklahoma. It's going to be interesting, though. We've only got 2018 and 2020 left in the current maps. And so it'll be interesting to watch. I know this is a few years down the road, but it's going to be interesting to watch what happens with CD5 if the Republicans try to draw it to make it a little safer, if they still have a supermajority in the legislature at that time.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that'll come.
It's not too early to talk about.
No, it's
that.
not.
We have talked
I
about it.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we're always willing to talk about redistricting.
So
We're nerds.
I've got a question. If we can go back to the races that have a lot of candidates in them, like the 12 candidates up Northwest Oklahoma City, does a candidate coming out of that do they bear any scars, so to speak, going into the general election? Is it harder for them to win if they've just had to spend a lot of money on a primary election between several people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends on the race. I know typical politician, attorney answer, it depends. But I think that if opponents go negative against somebody who eventually comes out of a primary or comes out of a runoff, then yeah, they've got some things to deal with in the general election, because whether those primary voters believed what the other opponents were saying or not, that's going to stick with them to the general. You know, sometimes you see those primary opponents coming out and endorsing the eventual party nominee, and that makes a big difference. But sometimes you see them endorsing the other party or not endorsing at all, and so you see it happen a lot of different ways. But this House District 82 race, I mean, it's very, very rare to see that many candidates in a primary, right. And so that will be a really, really interesting one to watch.
I could definitely see this lower ticket race having a lot more undervotes than usual. So if you're a Republican and your candidate didn't win, or you were just tired of all the primary electioneering, that you just didn't want to vote for anybody in the general, I could certainly understand that. Yeah,
you know, that district is one that a Republican will almost certainly win, and so there may be, you know, there probably will be some undervotes, but it seems to me that in that race, there aren't a whole lot of candidates who are just getting out there every day and knocking doors. With a field that large, it's almost impossible for everyone to be doing that. Very unlikely for everyone to be doing that.
I'd get tired of people knocking on my door if there were 12.
Yeah, those voters are going to have some major fatigue by the time June 26th, but definitely the primary, or definitely the runoff in August. They're going to be tired of it. So yeah, maybe they'll just not vote.
Yeah, you know, I think, and not to, I mean, there's always cases against this, not to stereotype it, but as we started this conversation, you brought up the idea of, you know, an influx of female candidates, and it always seems, I'm just trying to pander here, but I mean, it always seems like, and sometimes female candidates kind of, you know, work the doors a little harder. And we've talked about this before, and you know, there's been articles and studies that have said, you know, women tend to be, you know, think a lot more about whether or not they should run or not. They need some convincing, while men are just, you know, they sometimes jump in. And so I think the advantage is that sometimes, you know, and I think about someone like Munson, and there's other examples, that, you know, if I'm going to do it, I need to do it, you know, well, and I need to do it right. And you know, when especially the race, you know, that you mentioned in Yen's seat, the you know, with the two women that are running for the Democratic primary, I mean, they both kind of strike me as that a little bit. And then when I look, you know, and Julia Kurt as well in Senate District 30, and I'm not saying that the guys on the other, the Republican side aren't working hard. Some of them are working really hard. But sometimes there's this idea that, like, I'm kind of well known in the community. You know, people like me. You know, I'm just going to run. And it really does, especially in some of these races, it really does take, you know, the knocking the doors. I know Dale hates it, but I mean, that's
I mean, there's a reason that we keep doing it, right? Because it's the most effective way to win a legislative race like that. And when I was running in 2010 in the Democratic primary, it was I had 3 opponents who were all males, and I got out without a runoff because I knocked way more doors than anybody else. People got tired of people like Dale, got tired of me, and were like, if you don't come back, I'll vote for you, okay? And so, you know, it may be annoying, but it still works. But there is more of that. I've got to get out and talk to people. Number one, women are more willing or able, or, you know, whatever it is, to communicate and make sure that they're having those face-to-face conversations. But also there's this, you know, sort of chip on your shoulder, or not having as much confidence as, you know, a man who is more well connected, and so that definitely plays a part. You've seen it in so many races lately, that the female won just because she worked so much harder. And you're right, women don't just run, they don't just say, oh, I think I'm going to do this. Most of the time it's a much more deliberative process, and so there's a lot more preparation that goes along with it, and there's a lot more thought that goes into, do I have time to knock doors? Am I going to be able to do that? And so for a lot of different reasons, when you see a female candidate, it's likely that they're going to pound the pavement.
Yeah.
And I don't think you should discount the. I'm not saying you are, but you have to remember that in Oklahoma we haven't had that many strong female politicians.
Right.
Just 8 years ago, Mary Fallon won the governor's seat. She ran against Jerry Askins, also a woman.
Mm-hmm.
We have the last several superintendents of education were women. We have this fight over the labor commissioner post,
mm-hmm.
Which could end up being a woman in that position. It's taken a long time, but I think Oklahoma, we're starting to see these strong female political leaders, and it gives people. I don't know who your political mentor was, if it was a woman or not, but I think giving a lot of women the courage to run, mm-hmm. And the willingness to really put their foot out there and say, oh, I can do this.
Yeah, it's exciting. You know, in primaries before and in general elections before, when you had a woman and a bunch of men, the woman seemed to stand out just because she was a woman and all the rest were men. That's kind of what happened with me also. But it's going to be really interesting to see this year, when you have a lot of women going head to head, what happens, because other than, you know, Governor Fallon and Lieutenant Governor Askins, we haven't seen that a whole lot before, and so it's a relatively new experience, I think, for a lot of Oklahomans.
Well, and it takes those other races. I mean, you got to build up to it, right? Because, you know, you're right. We go back 8 years. We had a race for governor between two women, and now we have just one, out of
mm-hmm.
a dozen running for the office. So you've got to win those lower level races to build up and kind of make that name recognition. So it'll be interesting to see. And you talk about hitting the pavement. There's going to be people who go to the ballot box on June 26th who are like, I know who I'm voting for governor. I know what I want to do on medical marijuana, and then who the hell are these 7 names?
Right.
So they may be just like, well, that's the person that visited me.
Right. When you see
like,
someone on your doorstep, you're, oh, well, I saw their face. They came and asked me for my vote, so they're getting it. It'd be important. So will definitely be interesting to watch. We've got a couple more episodes before the primaries. We'll continue to talk about that. Representative, thanks so much for coming in studio. We really appreciate it. Always good to see you. Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. Continue to stick with the Oklahoman and newsok.com for more election coverage. We're just less 19 days away from the primary election on June 26th. For the Oklahoman, I'm Ben Felder. We'll see you again next week.